Nothing in there? No?
Just someone's cell phone.
Okay.
I assume that's not it.
Lisa Cottrell-Bentley has been writing since she was a child, winning her first writing contest at age 9. She's been writing professionally since 2002. Lisa and her daughters spent many hours searching for children's books about homeschoolers, but found very few, so they decided to create their own. As they discussed their dream storylines, the Right on Time series took shape. Lisa founded the Do Life Right Inc. publishing company, which specializes in books for, by, and about realistic homeschoolers of today. Today, the company has 11 titles in print and many more in the works. Lisa currently lives with her husband, Greg, and 2 daughters, Zoe, age 15, and Tegan, age 11, in California and Arizona. Please welcome Lisa.
Thank you. You all have a book inside of you. If you didn't, you wouldn't be in this room right now listening to a talk about publishing. There are lots of other talks going on during this conference about how to get that book out of you and onto paper, but the question remains, what do you do with it then? How do you get it published? It's a good question. And that's what I'd like to talk with you about. Because in today's world, you have a lot more publishing options than you might realize. There are lots of ways to publish a book, but many people think that there's only one way, and they call that traditional publishing. However, most people think that there's only one way to educate our children also, and we know better than that. That's why we're at a homeschooling conference. Today, I have some handouts, which Greg will be giving out, and they contain a bunch of things. We're only going to go over a few of those. The first is different types of publishing available in 2012. I started this list quite a while ago, and it is up to date as of last week, but things are constantly changing in the publishing world right now. And so I emphasize 2012 because you should always stay abreast of what's new. Also in here is a list of money myths, which we'll go over a little. Possible genres for you to write in. We won't go over that at all. Same with target audience questions for you to help decide who you are writing for. Steps to becoming a published author, as well as an example of a query letter. And my favorite, 27 empowerment questions for you to help you figure out what your personal goals are in regards to writing and for you to achieve them. I've had lots of twists and turns on my way to becoming a published author. And that's why I like talking about it, because I wish that this talk would have existed 10 years ago when I was originally looking into publishing. I started writing when I was little, probably like most of you. By the time I was 9, I'd already won an award on writing. And I met a children's book author, and I told my parents and my teachers I want to be a children's book author. And they said, oh, that's great, that's great. However, Lisa, you're really good at math and science. And at that time, over 30 years ago, that was a lot more uncommon for girls to be really good at math and science. And so they encouraged me, very gently, to pursue that so that I could be part of the first generation of independent women who didn't need a husband for financial support, and I could be, women's liberation empowered. I trusted them, I believed them, and I saw the wisdom in what they were saying. So I gave up writing for a big amount of time, and I actually became a software engineer, completely different than writing. I was a software engineer until my oldest was born. She's almost 16 now. And there was a part of me that just wasn't satisfied. And I looked inside of myself, what is missing? And I started writing again. I had a writer's voice, and it was really exciting to me. So I started writing all the time. And I spent over 8 years, from the time my youngest was born, for eight years, perfecting my craft, although I think that's an ongoing thing, and I'm fine with that, and trying to become a published author. I followed all the advice out there. I went to conferences, I went to writers' groups, I traded critiques with other authors, I met with agents, I met with editors. It was very rewarding, and I learned a lot. However, I didn't become a published author. And that's when I started realizing that while I was treating the craft of writing really seriously, I would never become a published author, a rich author. I would continue to be a poor writer if I kept doing what I had been doing all along. So what I needed to do was try something new and different, against the advice of everyone else. I learned that I needed to treat my writing as a business, because it is a business, and in order to be successful, you have to treat your writing as a business, not just a hobby. So, as I tried to become a published author, I did the traditional route. I became depressed. With every query letter I wrote, I got a little bit more depressed. Every rejection letter back, I became even more depressed. And at a certain point, my writer's voice that I was so excited to have had, it was pretty much gone. I was drained and depressed, and I was frustrated. And by 2009, I was essentially banging my head against a brick wall. It was really frustrating. I looked at that wall, and I wondered, do I need to get through it to get to my goal? My goal is here as a rich author, and here I was sitting as a poor writer. What do I need to do to get through that wall? So I asked for advice, and I was given the same advice over and over again. Send out more query letters, your time will come. Perfect your writing more, your time will come. How long did I have to wait? Until I was 90? How long? So I decided to take a step back and look at the big picture. So I could see the wall from a distance, I could see everything. Because after all, I'd done that in other aspects of my life many times already. In particular, my oldest daughter, Zoe, when she was born probably like many of your children, with a very strong will. Everything I thought was going to be about parenting, she showed us that we were completely wrong. By the time she was 1, she was already speaking in complete sentences. By the time she was 3, she was reading full-length novels, and didn't astound us because, oh yeah, that's Zoe, but it astounded the other people around us. By the time she was 5, I could see how we were heading toward another brick wall that I would bang my head against, because I was firmly set with the mindset that we had to send our children to public school. I very firmly believed that. She showed us otherwise. And we were around lots of other attachment parenting people who were also embracing homeschooling. So I started really watching what they were doing. And I saw that their relationships were really close when their babies were 0 through 3 or 4. The older they got, even in the homeschooling community, the more frustrated the parent and child relationships were. And that every time one of the parents would put down a dictate to mandate what the child had to learn, it was like they were putting a wedge between their relationship, between the parent and the child. And so here I was with a very strong, independent child where public school wouldn't work, and I saw that if we kept going in the homeschooling direction, that wasn't going to work either. And I was officially banging my head against the wall. What do you do? What do you do? And that's when I took a step back there and I looked at the big picture and I saw my goal was to have a highly educated, independent 18-year-old who can live on her own and be happy and self-sufficient. Meanwhile, I have a 5-, 6-year-old who's already really smart and learning all the time. I thought the wall was learning, but it wasn't. We decided to actually soar over the wall, forget the wall even existed, and that's when we discovered unschooling. And so I wondered, if they're in education, if there's a thing called unschooling, possibly in publishing, is there a thing called unpublishing? And there's not, but that's okay. Because what I was going for is that I was looking at all of my options. And I took a break from writing, decided to have a completely fresh slate, try to forget everything that everyone had ever told me about publishing, and I started making this grid. This grid didn't exist. I asked for it 100 times over for various people. We have another person, can you hand out more? This grid, I pretended like I had no preconceptions about what publishing was or wasn't. And I made a list of all the different types of publishing available then, and it's grown since, and what that meant, what I would get from it. And I also did a lot of research on what publishing meant. And as I researched traditional publishing, I discovered that if you are so-called traditionally published, what that means is that you are published with one of 6 New York publishing companies. And that's it. One of 6. And I said, but I know of hundreds of publishing companies. What do you mean there's only 6? Easy. Those hundreds, which is actually thousands that I've learned now, they are either a subsidiary and wholly owned by one of those 6, or they're not a traditional publishing company. They are an independent publishing company, which is a completely different way of publishing. Surprised me. I was told completely different advice than that. I also discovered, which probably most of you know, that in order to actually be traditionally published, it's very odd that we write a book, a manuscript actually, and we send it to somebody else and they edit it and print it. To be traditionally published, if you go back in through history, is to self-publish, to self-edit, self-publish, get your book out, get your writing out there to the world on your own. Much like to be traditionally educated, it's not to go to public school, even though we call that traditionally educated. It's to teach your children yourself, using mentors and yourself and the world as a classroom. You all know that. It made complete sense to me, but it wasn't what I'd been being told. And so I have this list now. What do I do with it? Especially because as I looked at it and I talked with other people, I realized that the advice I'd been told by other people was contrary to everything I'd been discovering. For starters, vanity publishing, self-publishing, independent publishing, and print on demand, if you read anything online, you'll probably see people use those interchangeably. They think they are synonymous. They're not. They are completely different. For starters, POD, or print on demand, isn't even a type of publishing. Not at all. It's a type of printing. And printing is just one step in the hundreds of steps that you need to do in order to get a manuscript to publication. It's the last step even. It's not even publishing, but people call it that. There's actually 2 ways to print a book. One is offset printing, which most of you have heard of, and that's the only one I'd ever heard of. And that is when you take a fully completed, perfect manuscript, cover and all of the documents, and you send it to a printer, and it is printed on a machine. And it's done in bulk, in a batch. And the batch usually starts around 10,000 books. It's really hard to find an offset printer who will do it a smaller run than that. The second way of printing a book is print on demand. And not only is it really common, but over 90% of all traditionally published books are used print on demand. It's more economical, you don't need a warehouse, you're more green because you're printing on demand. Makes complete sense. So I knew I wanted to go that route, that just made complete sense. So who is traditional publishing good for? All of our favorite authors are most likely traditionally published. J.K. Rowling, Stephen King, they're traditionally published. It is a great option for those who don't mind a long wait. For example, friends of mine who are traditionally published, first they write a manuscript, and then they send it to an agent or an editor. If they have an agent, the agent then spends quite a while trying to sell that manuscript. Once it's sold, so the author gives up all rights to it, once it's sold to a publishing house, then it takes between 2 and 4 years to get it published. Really long time. Unless, of course, it's about someone who just died or something like that. They push those through much faster. It's a great way to publish a book if you love writing query letters, if you love that whole process. You sometimes will get an advance. When I first wrote my grid, you always got an advance. But that is actually only around 30–40% right now, if you'll even receive an advance. And that's the numbers going less and less. And you cross your fingers, that the royalties will pay back your advance over time. Because if they don't, then guess what? You'll never be traditionally published again. The second book is actually your hardest to get published in the traditional publishing format. What is vanity publishing? This one has the worst reputation, and it should, because about 90% of vanity publishers out there are scam artists. It should have bad reputation. They steal our money. It's very typical for someone to be told by a vanity publisher, give us $2,000 and we'll give you 100 books printed exactly like you give it to us, with some stock photos on the cover. We'll plaster a few words on the front and the back, and you get about 100 books, and good luck selling them. Would I recommend vanity publishing? You'd think the answer would be no, right? But the fact remains that I belong to a writers group in Arizona in a community of retired citizens, and I met a woman there who was almost 100 years old. She had written a biography of her life, a memoir, and she saw that her 100th birthday was going to be in just a couple of months, and she wanted 100 books to give out to all of her grandkids. For her, vanity publishing was the exact answer. She could get them quickly. She didn't have to worry about anything other than just giving one lump sum to someone. I helped her find a reputable company, and she was happy. She's actually still alive, over 100 now. Great answer for her. What about self-publishing? What is it? Who is it good for? Self-publishing is when you treat your writing as a business. You take what you have written and you consider it a business, and you go through every single stage of publishing until you have a printed book, and then you go through every single stage of marketing and getting it into bookstores and all of that on your own. You hire independent editors and copy editors and